67 Sandy Hook School. Callers indicating she thinks there's someone shooting in the building.
And then he thought that that was a gunshot.
It started like any normal morning. A quiet school, young children settling into class, teachers preparing for the day ahead. Nothing felt different. Nothing felt wrong. But in less than 10 minutes, everything changed. On December 14, 2012, a single individual carried out one of the deadliest school attacks in US history, taking 26 lives, including 20 children between just 6 and 7 years old. The entire event unfolded in under 8 minutes, leaving behind a tragedy that still raises questions no one has fully answered. What happened inside that building moved too fast for anyone to stop. Before we continue, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and let's dive into how a place that felt completely safe became the center of unimaginable loss. Newtown, Connecticut. It was not the kind of place where people expected tragedy. It was a quiet town with around 28,000 residents, known for being safe, calm, and family-focused. Violent crime was rare here. In fact, there had been only one homicide in the entire town over the 10 years before 2012. That kind of record built a strong sense of security. People believed nothing like this could ever happen there. Sandy Hook Elementary School reflected that same feeling. It served young children from kindergarten through 4th grade, with hundreds of students attending daily. Security measures were already in place. Doors were locked after morning arrival, and visitors had to be identified through a monitored system before entering. On the surface, everything looked prepared, controlled, and safe. Families trusted the system. Parents dropped their children off without fear. Teachers focused on lessons, not threats. It was the kind of environment where danger simply did not feel real. That is what made what happened next so difficult to process. Because when something like this strikes a place that feels untouchable, it changes more than just one day. It changes how people see safety itself. And while the town believed it was protected, one person was already drifting further away from that reality. Long before that morning, there were signs that something was not right. Adam Lanza had shown developmental challenges from an early age. He struggled with speech delays, sensory issues, and difficulty with social interaction. By his teenage years, these problems had grown into something more serious. He was diagnosed with conditions including obsessive-compulsive disorder, anxiety, and Asperger's syndrome. As time went on, his world became smaller. He stopped attending school regularly and was placed on homebound instruction. Contact with others became rare. Even basic social interaction became difficult. Records showed that by his later teenage years, he was almost completely isolated, with very limited connection to family or the outside world. Attempts at treatment were inconsistent. A psychiatrist saw him around 20 times between 2005 and 2007, but no long-term plan was followed. Recommended therapies and support systems were not fully continued. Over time, the isolation deepened and his condition worsened without consistent intervention. By the years leading up to 2012, he was living a life almost entirely removed from normal routines. No job, no social circle, and very little structure. It was a slow and quiet decline that few people fully understood at the time. But isolation alone was not the full story, because behind that silence, a darker focus was beginning to take shape. As his isolation grew, his attention shifted towards something deeply disturbing. Adam Lanza developed an intense interest in past mass attacks. This was not casual curiosity. He spent long periods studying them in detail, collecting information and analyzing patterns. He created a large spreadsheet that tracked hundreds of mass killers, comparing factors like methods, victim counts, and outcomes. This focus became central to his daily life. He researched incidents like the Columbine High School shooting and stored related videos and materials on his computer. His activity showed a pattern of deep immersion, where real-world interaction faded while this interest continued to grow. Over time, it became less about learning and more about fixation. He also spent time editing online content related to violence and past attacks. These actions reflected how much of his thinking was now centered around these events. Instead of engaging with people, he was building a detailed understanding of destruction. At the same time, his connection to reality weakened. Reports described him as living in a space where thoughts about mass attacks became a constant presence. There was no clear boundary between research and obsession anymore. This was not something visible to the outside world, It developed quietly over time, without interruption. And while that obsession kept growing, access to something far more dangerous was already within reach. The firearms used in the attack were not obtained illegally. They were legally purchased by his mother and kept inside the house. This included a Bushmaster XM15E2S semi-automatic rifle, along with handguns and a large supply of ammunition. In total, investigators later found more than 1,400 rounds of ammunition stored at the home. He did not need to go far to access them. The weapons were already there, within reach, in an environment where his condition had been worsening for years. Despite clear signs of isolation and mental health struggles, there were no strict barriers preventing access to these firearms. He was also familiar with how they worked. Over time, he had been exposed to firearm use, including basic safety training. That meant this was not unfamiliar territory. It was something he already understood. In the days leading up to the attack, preparation became more deliberate. He gathered equipment, damaged a computer hard drive to remove data, and even drove near the school shortly before the event. These actions showed planning, not impulse. Everything was now in place. The isolation, the obsession, and the access had all come together. And on the morning of December 14th, 2012, that preparation turned into action. Sometime before 9:30 a.m., Adam Lancer fatally shot his mother, Nancy Lancer, inside her bedroom. She was 52 years old and was found in bed, having suffered 4 gunshot wounds to the head from a .22 caliber rifle. There were no signs of a struggle, suggesting she was unaware of what was about to happen. After that, he moved quickly. He gathered additional weapons from the house, including the Bushmaster rifle and handguns, and left in her car. The distance to Sandy Hook Elementary School was only a few miles, a short drive that connected the first act of violence to what would follow next. At approximately 9:35 a.m., he arrived at the school. The entrance doors were locked, following standard security procedures, but instead of stopping, he fired multiple rounds into a glass panel beside the door, breaking it and gaining access to the building. What had started quietly at home had now reached a public place filled with children and staff. There was no warning, no time to react. Everything changed the moment he stepped inside, and from that point on, the situation moved faster than anyone could fully understand. The entire attack inside the school lasted less than 5 minutes, with around 156 shots fired during that short window. There was no pause, also no time for anyone to fully react. Near the entrance, 2 staff members moved toward the sound, trying to understand what was happening. They encountered the shooter in the hallway and were killed within moments. The situation escalated instantly as he continued moving through the building. He then made his way toward the first grade classrooms. Most of the victims were in just 2 rooms near the entrance, where the majority of the shots were fired. In total, 20 children between 6 and 7 years old and 6 adult staff members lost their lives during the attack. The sequence of events inside those classrooms happened rapidly. There were attempts to hide, to stay quiet, to avoid being seen. But the speed of the situation left very little time for decisions. Within minutes, the damage was done. The scale of what had happened was still not fully understood outside the building, but even in those final moments, there were acts of courage that would quietly save lives. In the middle of confusion and fear, some people acted without hesitation. Inside multiple classrooms, teachers and staff made quick decisions that helped protect students. First grade teacher Kaitlin Roig moved 15 children into a small bathroom, blocked the door with furniture, and kept them quiet for nearly 45 minutes until help arrived. That decision kept every one of them safe. In another classroom, Victoria Lee Soto tried to protect her students by guiding them to hiding places. Some children were able to stay out of sight, while others escaped when the moment allowed. Across the building, similar actions were happening at the same time. Staff members directed children into closets, bathrooms, and storage spaces using whatever was available. In the library, adults quickly moved 18 children into a secure area and blocked the entrance. In other parts of the school, students stayed completely silent following instructions while the situation unfolded around them. These actions may have seemed small, but they made a critical difference. Some children survived by staying still and hidden. Others were guided out safely when there was a chance to move. In a situation that lasted only minutes, those decisions changed outcomes. Outside, emergency response had already begun, and by the time help reached inside the building, the final moments of the attack had already passed. The final moment came quickly. At 9:43 a.m., The last shot was heard inside the school. It was the shooter taking his own life using a handgun, ending the attack less than 10 minutes after it began. By the time officers entered the building minutes later, the situation had already reached its end. The first emergency call had come in at 9:35 a.m., and officers arrived at the scene within minutes. They moved through the building, securing classrooms and guiding survivors out safely. In total, more than 400 students and staff were evacuated as the area was locked down. Inside, the full scale of the tragedy became clear. There were no surviving victims among those directly targeted. All 26 victims inside the school had lost their lives, including 20 children and 6 adult staff members. Though identification of the victims was completed by the next day, allowing families to be formally notified. Even with all the evidence collected, one question remained unanswered. There was no clear explanation left behind for why this happened or why this location was chosen. In the years that followed, the impact of that day reached far beyond one town. New laws were proposed, schools increased security, and communities across the country began rethinking safety. Public opinion shifted sharply, with support for background checks rising to as high as 92% in the time after the tragedy. Organizations were formed, driven by families who refused to let the story end in silence. Even today, the effects are still being felt in policies, classrooms, and conversations. But one thing remains unchanged: the questions. Could something earlier have changed the outcome? And what responsibility do we all share in noticing the warning signs? Before you go, make sure to like, subscribe for more crime stories, and share your thoughts below. Thanks for watching.